Hey everyone, welcome to K6 Office Hours. As always, I'm Nicole van der Hoeven.
And I'm Sima. And with us
And
today
today
we
we have two guests.
Yep.
Sorry. Someday we'll get that intro right.
Okay, so we're joined by Robin, who's been on before. He's the CEO of K6. And we also have Mark. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a bit, Mark?
Yeah, my name is Mark, and I'm the head of customer here at K6 Cloud. I manage the customer success, professional services, and sales teams. I've been with the company for like 6 years now.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that. So I think, Robin, you've been with the company for 8 or 10 years?
Well, try 13 or 14 or something.
Well, sorry. I think I need to rewatch our talk with you. Sorry.
Yeah, it's been something like that. I think I joined in 2007. So what is that? That's 14 years, I think.
Yeah, Robin's been in the company since prior to being allowed to drive a car, so it's been a while.
I was born into the company. Yeah.
So have you been on the customer side of things since you started, Mark?
Yes. Yeah, I started as a hybrid customer success support person for our legacy product, and learned a lot about load testing through helping people in support.
I think I really wanted to get you on here, Mark, because I think you're the one that talks to real users the most, really, out of anybody. And I think it would be cool to get your input on some features that we want to see. And that's also why I have Robin here. I asked him here too, because maybe we can get him to comment on how feasible things are that we want. Sima, do you have any wish list items that you'd like to discuss while we have both Mark and Robin here?
Well, sure, I do. But before we get to that, I'd just like to mention that we are still hiring. So if you want to come join us at K6, go to k6io/jobs and have a look at the open ads. I'll go ahead and start then, since you asked me. One feature that I've really been looking to get into K6, especially into K6 Cloud, because you're already basically able to do that in the OSS product, is to get some kind of data storage where you're able to place data between test runs or during a test run, maybe sharing data between VUs or just polling for passwords or whatever. Is that something that's on the roadmap, or what's your thought on that?
Who?
I think that's a question.
Yeah, you said Robin. You said roadmap, so I figure Robin. Yes, I have thoughts about that though.
Then. Yeah, I think there's lots of things that you can or that we could do in terms of how data is managed, manipulated, queried during a test and potentially in between test runs even. But I think from a roadmap perspective, we will take iterative steps as we always do with features. So we would probably start with some of the most, let's call it, urgent things that we see people or customers requesting from us. So in the cloud, that would mean basically having better functionality to automatically sort of partition data for the purposes of parameterizing requests, etc. So if you have a big CSV file, for example, with usernames and passwords that you want to use for parameterizing a login request or authentication request, you shouldn't necessarily need to know how to slice and dice that data for the purposes of accessing it, for example, say only once, so uniquely across all VUs, even when VUs or when the test as a whole is running on multiple different servers in different geographic locations. So that would be the first problem or thing we tackle when it comes to sort of data during tests, how to make it possible while providing sort of an easy to use API in K6 for configuring that. So you don't have to deal with things like, this is load gen server 47 running VU 259. What piece of data should I have to pull now from the CSV file to make my uniqueness requirement possible? So we're working on stuff like that to make that easier. And then from there, we can build additional things, because I know there's lots of various things that is supported in other tools and sort of on people's wish list. But that's the first step, I would say.
That's actually kind of cool. I'm thinking we've already taken some steps towards that, right? In terms of in the OSS product that we've added support for segmenting VUs. Although you cannot really segment the test data yet, you can at least segment the VUs so that you, for instance, on one load generator or on one Kubernetes pod, if you will, run a segment of VUs rather than the full spectrum. And the same goes for the read-only arrays that we introduced just recently. That's actually, at least how I see it, also part of going in that direction, because now you're able to, instead of loading your data once for every VU, you can actually load it once for the whole test or the whole load generator, and then access it from all VUs without multiplying the memory as you would have done prior to that change. So that definitely makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And that was actually probably the first iteration we did, right? Because initially, as you alluded to, when you opened a file in K6, we opened it for every virtual user, right? So that was the sort of first, I guess, MVP version of getting data into a load test in K6. And then we quite recently added the shared arrays that you mentioned, right? So that made it possible to load data, but it's shared across all VUs on the same machine at least. And then sort of the next iteration would be making it possible to let's call it extract or consume data from a shared array, but according to some specific pattern that you need for your use case. That could be sort of based on uniqueness requirements or whatever it might be.
That's
Have
funny.
you gotten any feedback on that, Mark? Sorry.
Yeah, no, unique data from a data store has been a support question for the past 6 years. When we released K6 to the world and we spun up that discourse forum, just to get that question in there, I asked the question and answered it myself. And the discussion's been going on in that thread since like April of 2019 with different methods and ways to approach the problem. I think just giving a simple API to extract unique data would solve a lot of users' problems, and just take that complex math problem it becomes out of the user's hands to think about.
Yeah, I actually read a thread in the forum just the other day where a user had a 650 megabyte CSV file that he wanted to pass to his
wow.
Imagine doing that in the old version of K6 with, for instance, 1,000 virtual users. Your computer would just grind to a halt.
You wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
You shouldn't.
But now it's actually possible. Maybe 650 megabytes is still way too much for most users, or it's not really efficient to use that much data, but it's actually possible, and it will only take 650 megabytes of RAM as compared to 650 megabytes times 1,000 virtual users.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why I really like this, I would want to see this feature, is that I think it enforces best practices, because there's still a lot of scripts where they just use the same data over and over again. So if you have a test of like 100 users, then you're logging in with the same user account. So then you start looking at caching, like, are those requests being cached? Because then the response time is not right. It's not going to be accurate. And then you might get issues with a session. Like there's some applications where you can only have one session up and running. So I think having something like a test data store within K6 Cloud might make it, I guess, easier for people to get started with using dynamic data in their tests. Is that sort of the reasoning that most customers tell you about for wanting that feature, Mark?
For wanting the which feature are we talking about
like
here?
like a test data store, or is it really being able to use unique data?
It's come up a few times. A lot of people work around it just by using the K6 CLI, so they have their file locally, and then it uploads when they execute K6 Cloud. But some customers that have maybe some QA people that aren't going to write code but need to execute tests or build some tests, they definitely want to upload something to the cloud, not mess around with the CLI. I think the big opportunity is to add some additional features on top of such a data store to give some uniqueness and whatnot.
Have you seen what BlazeMeter came up with recently on this front?
I haven't, no.
It's really cool. And I mean, at K6, I think we always try to look at different technologies, even if they're at competitors. And they have a thing where you can not only store data on their cloud, but you can also generate data there. So you can say, I want a credit card number, and it spits it out in a format. I would love to see that in K6 Cloud. What do you think, Robin?
Well, yeah, I mean, but I would say not only in K6 Cloud, but I mean, that's something that might even be something we would want to have in K6 open source. I mean, I think what we would recommend today for such a thing would be a solution like Faker.js.
Yeah.
Which you can find a tutorial for down here that I've
conveniently. So I mean, that would be the approach, right? So you could get basically email addresses, credit cards, what have you, automatically generated according to a specific geography, also like a specific country's way of doing those things. So having something like that, built into either K6 or K6 Cloud, I think would also be sort of a natural progression because it's so common. It would also alleviate the need for every individual user or customer from having to generate their own data sets necessarily, and you could instead just generate randomly, which for many use cases I would think is enough also, because you're not anyway supposed to use real production data, so it's supposed to be fake synthetic data.
I would also argue that Faker.js is so easy to use and so convenient. I mean, it really doesn't take too much to get started, and we have example projects for it on GitHub. So if you want to do that kind of data generation, you're already able to do it without much effort. So while it would be cool to have it integrated into the OSS product or into the cloud, it's not really, at least not in my view, a burning need, because you're already able to solve it so nicely.
Yeah,
there's definitely go on, Mark.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've helped people and I just introduced them to Faker.js. They've never heard of it before. They're like, "This is exactly what I need. Thank you."
I definitely think maybe there's no need to do it in OSS because you can already do it with Faker. I just want a nice interface for it on the cloud. Where you can not just generate, but also store values that you've seen and be able to separate them in columns like, okay, I generated this random credit card number and I already used that to sign up to a service. So in my script where I'm signing up, don't use that credit card. Take it from this other column of unused credit cards. Otherwise, the system is going to say, oh, that has been used by another account. Like, I think that's something that comes up a lot. So it's not just generating, but a way to manage that data would be awesome.
Yeah, but I think you can probably fold it in under the same sort of consumption abstraction layer that we intend to build for sort of the generated, or this sort of CSV
segmented,
imported. Yeah, okay. Or I mean, when you basically bring your own data already generated somewhere else. So generating stuff through a Faker.js like API would just be another data source, and then on top of that we would have sort of the consumption patterns for how you can consume this data. Is it based on uniqueness constraints, or that you need to consume it in a specific order, alphabetically or top to bottom or something like that? And what should happen also when you run out of data? Should that mean, is that the end of the test, or is that the end of the virtual user that no longer has any data? Or should we start to reuse data according to some pattern? So I think there's like different layers here to this very interesting problem.
So, Mark, is there a question or comment or most requested feature request that you can think of, or are there just too many different ones to pick one?
I'm thinking here. Yeah, no, there's a lot of different use cases. I speak with customers and prospective customers and open source users. There's so many different use cases out there. I don't know if I can narrow down one on the spot like that.
Yeah. So what about like creating the script? Because I would imagine that a lot of people get hung up on that part because I think it's the most daunting part of running a test. Like once you have a script ready and it's just about scaling it up or whatever, that's pretty easy in K6 Cloud. But I imagine that there are a lot of requests for an easier way to create the script in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to say. I think the general feeling is people like it when you make a tedious task easier for them. So script creation can be very tedious, and making that easier, at least giving them a foundation to work from that is 80 to 90% complete, just adding a little bit of logic, that goes a long way to users.
Do we, I know that we've talked about Postman in the past, Robin. I think that Postman is a great tool that a lot of people come across pretty early on because it's a great tool for sending sending messages to an API endpoint, but it's not so great for load testing. Is there anything that you think that we could do to kind of capitalize on that very familiar interface already?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several things, that we have already started trying, and I think that we can expand. I mean, for one, we have our converter, right? That Simon knows about.
Sim is on the ball.
Now, yeah.
He's like,
yeah, man, he has the links ready. So that's one way, right? Allowing people to reuse existing test cases or existing data that they've already created, and just reusing it for the purpose of running load tests. That's one thing, and the other is similar to Postman with its UI for making requests. I mean, we build a similar thing in our cloud service, right, to make it a little bit easier for more users to be involved in the testing. So providing that sort of graphical point and click experience compared to the default scripting experience is something that helps bring more people into the group when it comes to testing. So, and we like that. We like making it possible for teams and for different functions to collaborate on testing. So it's important.
Oh, thank you, Carlos. That's really nice.
That's so nice.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah.
I'd also like to do a shout out to a GitHub user called, Tim81, who's been doing a lot of really good pull requests towards the Postman to K6 repo the last days. So thank you a lot, Tim. It's really appreciated. And should be live by now. So there's a new version, 1.5.0, that you can download from NPM or Docker to use to convert your Postman scripts.
Hi, James.
Hello,
James
James.
says he got here late and watched the first half at 2x speed.
Hey. I have a few comments about Postman to K6. So
go for it.
Well, first starting with the test builder. When I take users through our product, whether it's a demo or helping somebody that's an existing customer, maybe new to their organization, people like the test builder. It's one of those get me 80, 90% of the way done. I'm not an expert in the K6 scripting APIs yet, but it gives me this script that's usable. Moving to my point on Postman to K6 would be really nice if the web app allowed you to upload a Postman collection, and we did the conversion
Yeah.
right within the web app.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I'm not
I'm
saying
looking
anything
at you,
against that.
Robin.
I agree. Okay. I agree. No, of course, that would be very, very helpful, right? And that would sort of be a logical next step in terms of importing or integration experience between Postman and K6 Cloud.
Yeah, that would be cool to see. But I guess we'd also need to make sure there's feature parity between what you can do in Postman and what you can do in Test Builder, if we want to still put it into Test Builder format rather than just a script.
Yeah, that's a problem for the product team to solve.
Yeah. James also. Sorry, go on. Did you want to say something soon?
No, go ahead.
James also has a comment. He said, "Oops." Allow passing tag name from K6 Cloud to Datadog. I wish Mustafa were here. He could probably comment on this.
I think Robin's connection might have given up. Oh, there he is. Hi, welcome back.
Okay, he's back.
Thank you.
Did you get to read the question?
No, sorry, I missed the past minute or something.
Okay, so James is wondering, or is wishing for being able to pass the tag name from K6 Cloud to Datadog. I actually thought you were already able to do that, but maybe it's for some reason excluded from the export.
Yeah, I don't know the details of this. I know there was a discussion internally in our Slack the other day regarding this, because I know Datadog is not super keen on getting more tags sent to them. We've had some discussions with them, but we're trying to, as far as I understood, I don't know if I'm remembering correctly now, but I think we came to some sort of conclusion that we can make some things optional, and then it's up to the user what they wish to send, rather than sending stuff sort of by default.
Let me check that up for you, James, and get back to you with an answer on what happened there. Or maybe if Mark want to do it, because I think you're a cloud user, right? So maybe, yeah, we'll sort it out somehow and get back to you at least. Carlos also described his workflow, which I think was really interesting. So he has developed a Slack bot that consumes collections from Postman through Newman, and then export those collections with Postman to K6, allowing him to simplify his work. And I think Tim, that I mentioned earlier, has some similar use case as well, but he also hooked it up to OpenAPI to actually generate the Postman collection and then have it run through all of these steps to become a K6 script. So that's really, really cool, Carlos.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. I'd love to see like a blog post on that or something.
Hint.
Yeah, if you'd like to come on,
sorry.
Carlos, and show what you've put together at some point in the office hours, feel free to reach out to me on Slack, and we'll make sure to make that happen. That would be really cool to see.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. How many? Okay, I'm just going through my wish list here. What about Mark? How many people do you get asking for raw or 1 second transaction metrics, or is it just me?
I think it's just you. I've had a few conversations, and somebody specifically asked, "Oh, what is the how is the data aggregated in 3 seconds?" And like, "Oh, that's plenty. I don't need anything kind of more granular than that. That's getting too much noise for me." So yeah, I've not heard your specific request, Nicole. I'm sorry.
I just love raw data, because what if there's something within those 3 seconds, or what if there's one huge spike, and because it gets averaged out over the last 3 seconds, then it looks like either everything has a higher response time than normal, but it was really just one outlier that was causing it, or the outlier gets lost because it gets brought down with everything else. So I kind of feel like it would be
We should-
cool to have the option for it.
Yeah, we should really get one of the backend or K6 experts here on here sometime to maybe explain how this works. But I know we've taken steps in how we aggregate data to minimize any sort of effects of outliers like that. So we try to sort of bucket things so that we don't miss any important outlier type of data point. But I agree. Yeah, sometimes it would be nice to be able to dig all the way down to the tiniest piece of information when you're debugging. Yeah.
I guess the problem would be the storage that would take, because then you have to think about, well, you wouldn't want to store raw data for absolutely every test, so you probably want to roll that up after a certain period has passed. It's complicated.
Yeah, but I mean, it's complicated in one way, but I think it's also just it's not a super complicated thing. It's just that you would have to have sort of multiple, I think, levels of how you store data. Right, similar to with many cloud providers, you have many different options how you store data depending on how often you need to access that data, and then you pay accordingly, right? If you need to access stuff immediately in real time and you have lots of data, you pay more. If you can, live with the fact that you can only access your data, several hours after you've requested it, then you can probably pay a little bit less and store more data for a longer time. So I think we could probably do something similar eventually, right, where you have multiple levels of storage and access, where when your test is running, maybe you have the data sort of hot and you have access to all the raw data. And then over time, as the data becomes probably less interesting, you aggregate it more and more and more until it's eventually, not maybe necessary to store anything more than the highest level of aggregate summary for sort of more comparison purposes over time. But I would maybe say that it's not come up so much that we have prioritized doing that sort of more advanced storage mechanism.
Okay, Simon, I think this is one for you in particular. James says he'd love to hear more about the Chaos plugin, if that fits in the discussion. It does. I'm getting a lot of requests for that functionality since I mentioned you have it. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. We actually did about an hour of that. Was it last week? So maybe I would recommend you to first go back and watch that one if you missed that one, James, because Nicole went pretty deep into detail of what you can do with it at this point. But we're definitely looking to continue developing that plugin. So if you have any suggestions or ideas, feel free to reach out, because I'm all ears for all suggestions. But as it looks right now, you're able to add a limited set of chaos experiments to your tests or fault injections, namely one. So you can actually kill off a pod during your test and have that as some kind of fault injection to make sure that you still are able to hit your thresholds even as that pod restarts. But we're definitely looking to add more capabilities to that as we go forward.
I remember that he did comment on that video, so I think that James watched it. But maybe he's also looking at it from the perspective of K6 Cloud. And correct me if I'm wrong, James, but it would be cool to have that functionality in K6 Cloud. As it is, when I tried it out, which is, if you want to hear more about that, watch the video that Simon mentioned. It was last week's one. But one of the reasons that I didn't do it on the cloud is because the Chaos extension only works if you're running it locally. It doesn't work from the cloud because it requires that extension to be able to stop a pod. I don't know what it would take or how feasible it would be to incorporate that into cloud.
Well, we've been talking a bit about that and different approaches to making it viable to at least run some of our extensions in the cloud as well. Nothing concrete on the roadmap from what I know. Maybe Robin would like to chime in, but at least it's it's somewhere on the roadmap to be able to run at least a subset of extensions in the cloud as well.
Yeah, exactly. I would probably not say it's on the roadmap because we haven't really slotted it in sort of time-wise. But we know it's something we eventually want to do.
Oh, sorry, on the horizon, maybe.
On the horizon, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It depends on how one defines roadmap, right? But it's, yeah, I mean, since we've taken the approach now with how we add features to K6, in that we first try to implement things as extensions and then have a sort of mechanism or path to graduate things into K6 core rather than trying to squeeze everything into core immediately. We also basically need to have the possibility of running some of these extensions in the cloud, because a lot of the stuff that we implement now are things that people, both users and customers, are requesting, and we would like to be able to offer it in our commercial service, of course, as well, of course. So yeah, eventually we will have some mechanism for using extensions in the cloud as well, but it's not something that we have any concrete plans and dates on yet.
Because it's so new, right? We've only
maybe-
had the XK6 support for a couple of months. It's really brand new, so we really need to nail that first and make sure that it works as we want it to before we're able to integrate it tightly into the commercial offering.
I guess one thing that you could do thinking about it is generate load with K6 Cloud as normal, and then run a single user for chaos from a local machine, because you're probably not going to want hundreds of users for the chaos part of it. So it's not going to be an issue whether, like, you probably don't need a load generator, a specific load generator just to do that. And that way you could still be using the same script with K6 just running with a single user. That might be a good interim solution.
Yeah, and if anyone has the idea that they want to run XK6 Chaos with in a multi-user script or with a lot of VUs, please don't.
Yeah.
Well, for some added chaos, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there's another one from James. I'm confused about this. He's asking about plans to share memory between setup and teardown in the main section of the script. It would make it easier for recovering load runner guys like me. Hey, I'm a recovering load runner user too.
Welcome
I
to the
thought we
support
already
forum.
could. Can we not?
Well, the problem is that when we so going back, so we have had this goal, right, since the beginning, that we want people's test scripts to be runnable in all of the different execution modes that we intend to support in K6, meaning local execution with one K6 process, cloud execution where we execute tests potentially across several servers and different geographies, and then the third one is clustered or distributed local execution. And we want scripts basically to be executable without change between these execution modes, and that basically imposes some constraints on how we can do things in K6. And one of those constraints means that when you execute a test in the cloud, the setup function is only run on one server, right? It's run once on one server, whereas all of the other servers involved in the test, which can potentially be hundreds, they don't execute the setup function. So they don't even have any knowledge of the setup function executing. They just get fed with the result of the setup function. That data gets passed into the main function when the test starts executing on all machines. So because of limitations like that, we have some restrictions in how we can do things. But I think from the high level perspective, it benefits people more than the potential problems, or that's at least our position right now.
I think we have kind of the same type of problem, at least, even when we run in local execution on one load generator or one server as well. For instance, if we're thinking of sharing data from the main section with a teardown, since the teardown is only run once, and you might have thousands of iterations prior to that, in multiple different VUs.
Yeah.
Which data should we then present in the teardown, or should we present all data? In that case, it might really balloon the memory. So it's really hard to do that as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because the VUs run in different JavaScript virtual machines, so it's not trivial to just somehow merge memory from them. So yeah, it needs to be some sort of API that can collect things and then expose it between these different sort of execution contexts.
Like a test data store?
Yes, like a data store
I think
that you can manipulate. Yeah.
I think what James is talking about is on LoadRunner, you have like a V user init one, and then the main, and then the V user end, and each one is run for a single virtual user. So it's like it's on a user level rather than a test level, which is what ours is. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, and that's something we have also discussed, adding additional levels to the setup and teardown. So right now it's on a test level, so it's test wide. But we have discussed also adding I think on the scenario level, so you can do a setup and teardown per scenario, and also like on the individual VU levels, you would basically have like 3 levels of setup and teardown. But those are just as far as I know, still just issues being discussed. So nothing solidly planned there either.
Here's another one. Hey, I didn't even ask him to say it, Robin. But there's a running joke now internally, James, where we all bug Robin because he's the one that's working on this.
Yeah, so it's still being worked on.
Yeah, but he's asking for a timeline. I didn't say it. I wouldn't do that to you, but
timeline.
you know.
Yeah, no. So the timeline is that it's. I'm trying to weasel out of saying a date here, but there is one remaining thing that needs to be basically resolved before we can start testing internally. And I don't think that's very far away. And then when we start testing internally, I'm not sure how long it will take, but I'm guessing we would need to do some weeks of testing internally before we can release it. So date-wise, sometime during the summer, maybe we can have it publicly available. If that's good enough.
That's a great answer.
Thank you, Mark.
Get requests for that, Mark?
Yeah, people ask about it when we're going through our demos and walkthroughs of the product. Hey, what can I do on the front end? And I tease out to them that, hey, we're kind of working on this thing. It's in some alpha or beta demoable stage or release. We could set you up to show you it, but I don't have a concrete timeline. So I like giving my users concrete timelines whenever I can. So that's why I tease Robin a little bit here. Give me something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's to Mark's point, it's something that's been requested for a very long time, right? Since browser-based load tests, as we've discussed previously, is something that's been around for a long time. So naturally, people ask for it, and many use cases are simplified when you have access to running things in browsers compared to just doing protocol level as we do today. So it's a very reasonable ask, I would say.
Okay, James is also asking about enhanced cloud analytics.
Oh, what does that mean? I'm not really sure I know what enhanced cloud analytics means.
I guess it could mean a lot of things.
Is that referring to the performance insights? Or yeah, sorry, Mark, you might have.
I would just assume any enhancements to it. What else can we display and show? Maybe. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's wait. Maybe wait till James's
shall we go on that tangent?
Yes, let's talk about insights. Yes, there is a cycle now. We're still in the planning phases, but we definitely want to improve insights. And if for people who don't know what that is, that's our smart algorithm that tries to detect common patterns that signify a problem in a load test. So it's things like, the CPU of a load generator was too high, which is a cue to go back and rerun the test with some modifications to the script, perhaps. Or it could be like best practices for a script, like, hey, you should include think time or whatever it is. It already works now and it's great, but there's a lot more that we want to do with it. So analytics from that point of view, that's definitely coming, right, Robin?
Yes, exactly. So there's a lot of things that we want to do with that feature as well. And like all of the other features, as we've discussed, we take an iterative approach to that feature. So we have some basic things now in terms of being able to detect queuing behavior, increased failure rates and things like that. But we intend to improve it both by adding better means for understanding the severity of various alerts, and also increasing sort of the scope for what can be detected. And that includes both covering sort of both sides of the test equation, right? So right now we only do things from the client side, but eventually we want to also support the server side, so we can talk about both sides of the equation. But another interesting is also the timeline, so the timeline axis, so how things are looking now compared to some previous point in time. So regression-based analysis is also something that's very interesting to us.
James is also talking about improved analysis tools for comparisons in particular, which we talked about just last week, I think, Robin, right? In the catch up for the insights. I think it's something that we said that we wanted to do later on, but it probably won't come out in the first iteration. Would that be fair to say?
Sorry, which was this again? The comparison over time?
Comparisons of tests, and being able to say, like, this test had a 3% response time, a response time that was 3% higher than the previous one, or something like that.
Right, exactly. So to Mark's point earlier, also, like, we always think from the perspective, what can we do to make things easier for people? And comparing results over time is one of those things, right? That can be pretty time consuming if you have to jump between different test runs or different tests and trying to figure out what the differences are. And it's something that's quite well suited for a machine to do instead. So yeah, it's something we want to do because it's something we can do, and it will provide value to our customers, definitely.
That's actually a thing that you and I discussed this just a couple of days ago as well, Nicole, or a tangent of this feature, I would say, because I maintain a lot of different projects or code projects on GitHub, and for me, a lot of time is spent in PRs or reviewing other people's code. And one thing that would significantly help me, for instance, is to be able to express my thresholds in a test as percentages against the baseline. So for instance, being able to say, okay, I want to fail this test if I have a regression that's bigger than 2% of what I've set as my performance baseline. And not having to do that calculations myself, and maybe even being able to push a new baseline every now and then with a major release, for instance. That sort of comparison in the threshold stage, or rather having them evaluated at runtime, both locally or via the CLI and in the cloud, would be extremely helpful for me, at least.
Yeah.
Is that something you've heard before, or is it commonly requested, or is it only me?
No, I mean, I would say it's a pretty common situation, right? Where typically when you analyze things, you analyze it comparatively to some baseline, right? In and of itself, yeah, sure, you can say things sort of based on research, what we know of how humans react to response times, etc. But otherwise, you typically compare it to some previous state of your system. So baselines are an important sort of foundational concept, I would say, when you do performance engineering. So yeah, being able to say that you have, for example, a new baseline would be interesting also from the perspective of doing automatic analysis, because the algorithms could also use the baseline as the reference, right, for comparing the new performance, and then being able to integrate the automatic analysis with thresholds is another interesting iteration, right? So you could, instead of setting threshold based on absolute numbers, you could set them, based on relative numbers to the baseline, or even say set threshold based on performance insights, right? So there's lots of things that we are exploring and will need to continue exploring in that domain, but all of it is interesting for the purposes of removing a lot of the more manual work from our users and customers in analyzing results, both sort of the individual results, but also over time.
Okay, James has another question. He's asking about having K6 Cloud pull from a GitHub repo for the script.
Yeah, we have a version of that. Not really pulling the script from GitHub, initiated from K6, I wouldn't say, but what we do, or what we recommend usually, is that you, in your CI pipeline or in GitHub Actions or what have you, that you initiate the actual test run from there, so you're able to use the latest checked-in version of your test script. And I think that's a pretty common approach to know where everything, where all the sort of CI quality measures and things like that, where they originate from, to have them initiated by the CI rather than having the other tool, in this case K6, initiated. But maybe we have that on the roadmap as well. Robin probably knows.
Well, we don't know. We don't have a GitHub integration. It's come up over the years several times, and it's something we have looked into. Basically, having something similar to what the CI tools tend to do, right? You put some YAML file or something in your repo that points to where your tests are, and then we could pick that up and we get notified that your repo has changed, or get notified in a PR or something like that. But yeah, typically what we recommend is that people handle this themselves in their pipelines, and if they need to execute a cloud test, they would use the K6 Cloud command, and that would basically upload the latest version of their script to our cloud service. So we haven't. I think the conclusion so far we have arrived at is that we have a good enough sort of workaround for using K6 in a sort of version control CI kind of workflow. But another dimension of this that comes up every now and then also is being able to have results in pull requests. So having like a load test check in your pull request flow. So it's maybe tangential, but yeah.
One thing that I've heard on our side, on my side, the customer-facing side, people want to update a test script. They don't want to run it right away, but they want the next execution in the cloud to use that latest test script. So if there was, some type of K6 upload, K6 stage that could push that updated script, that seems to be a problem people want to solve. Or maybe a case where QA is running the tests, but developers are maintaining the scripts. Another thing I've heard on my side of the house.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that. As James mentioned here as well, with scheduled tests, that some people requested some mechanism to update the script in the cloud, so that K6 Cloud scheduling feature could pick up the change of the script. What we've recommended, and of course this as well, Mark, probably, but is that you could also, you can use the scheduling mechanism of your CI tool if you need to get sort of the latest from the repo, which I believe most CI tools support today have some sort of scheduling or cron mechanism.
Yeah, that
But
was
So
what I was
I
supposed to
actually
say.
have. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Go on, Simon.
I was just going to say that I definitely think scheduling in your CI is a good approach for that. But as Mark says, being able to upload it but not run, so you can maybe even manually trigger it when you want to run the actual test, that would be really cool. And I think we've discussed it at separate occasions, but
Yeah, we also have customers that have sort of different teams running tests, and some users use the CLI and some want to use the cloud UI. So from that perspective, it'd be nice as well to sort of be able to upload the latest version so people using the UI can run tests as well.
So I have this set up for like my personal site, which obviously isn't a very complex application. It just runs on Hugo. But what I do is I use GitHub Actions, and in my repo, I have both the application code and a folder for tests. So I have my K6 script there. So if I wanted to change my K6 script, I could just change that part. But GitHub Actions is set up so that it will watch a certain work tree. The work tree is for the application code, not the tests. So if that changes, then it will fire off the K6 script in the cloud. So I want it to run every time I make a commit, but I also have it set up so that it's scheduled. So once the first one has come through, you can go into K6 Cloud and just set it up to run on a schedule so that you don't have to fire it off from GitHub Actions. So that way I'm kind of doing it on both Cloud and GitHub Actions, if that makes sense.
The only problem that comes in there is if something changes and you need to test something slightly different, and the cloud wants to fire off the schedule, but it doesn't have the latest version of the test script. That's what I hear people want to solve, and I think that's what James is saying.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I guess you would, yeah, maybe you can just do it from GitHub Actions.
Well, the only way to update the script would be to trigger a test, and then you use a
Well,
test run.
So the way that I have it set up, it's only looking for changes in a particular work tree. So changing the test won't trigger a run. It
But
will
then
just
you
get
will-
picked
then
up
you
in
will,
the next run.
Yeah, then you will not get the test sent to K6 either. So that's basically the issue, right? That if you change the test and you want it to propagate to your scheduled test in K6 Cloud, but you don't want to run it right
Yeah,
away.
the scheduled one won't. Yeah.
Yeah.
The GitHub Actions one will. Okay,
Yeah.
I see what he's saying. Yeah, that could be a good thing. I haven't. I guess that would be a. You're saying, Mark, that other people have requested it as well, right?
Yeah, it definitely has come up, and I guess in your case, like, yeah, that would solve. I mean, you would assume most people aren't making too many changes to their test script if their application's not changing, but I mean, I'm sure there's cases where that does happen, and there's that period that people want to solve for and not waste a test run. That's really what it comes down to.
Okay, that makes
Interesting.
sense. Yeah. Another thing that I had was how feasible would it be to be able to upload data to K6, so that we could have not just load test results on there, but maybe we could upload server monitoring metrics in there as well. Mark is smiling like, "Yep, heard that one before."
I've been selling this idea for a bit, trying to get results back into the cloud. So yeah, Robin, can we do something like this? I would love it. I've heard it from other people. Yeah, they run tests. Maybe they save the results. They stash them away because they don't really need them. They just want to have them on hand just in case. And then sometime later, I want to revisualize this. I want to take a look at it, compare it to something new. It seems like a very nice thing to make available one day.
But what are we talking about now? Is it sending or pulling in
I think
metrics
there's
from?
two parts.
Yeah, right. It's two
here.
parts.
Yeah.
So that's what I heard as well.
Yes, give me it all.
Visualizing actual monitoring data or application server data, and uploading local test results.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, the server data is something that is interesting to us. We did a short survey some years ago where we asked if people rather have the server data stored on our side, or if they wanted our data stored on the server side monitoring APM provider side or observability side. And more people wanted our data on the observability side. So that's what we started with. And that's why we have worked on building these integrations with Datadog, Azure, Azure Insights, and the soon to be made available Prometheus integration, where you can basically stream the metrics we collect to those providers. And eventually we want to have the reverse as well, so we can pull in the server-side metrics to our service, and then we can use that in our performance insights. Right, so that's the first part. The second part is pulling in metrics of test data from, for example, like an InfluxDB or something like that, right? That would be interesting, or even from a CSV file. I think it would probably be done similarly to how we approach other integration projects, right? So we would probably support some formats from the start, say maybe the default like CSV output of K6 or something. We can suck in that data and store it in the cloud service for visualizing using our UI, and then we can build it out with more sort of importers. So yeah, I think that's a great idea. It would help the migration path from open source to our commercial service. So yeah, something that's interesting to us as well, of course.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, it's just metrics, right? Whether it's a metric from an APM provider or a metric that we've created, if it's in a proper format.
Yeah. And I would just add actually that I would much prefer it to be like an open format, so some sort of like open metrics based, which is based on Prometheus format, something like that. So it would be interchangeable rather than trying to invent some proprietary thing.
There's this question, a comment from Sterling Grog about the previous topic, which was about the being able to fire off, change a script without necessarily start a run. And he says that he's also run into this issue, especially when he's working with devs who are making changes for the index, URLs, or parameters for the script.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the situations where it would be helpful to be able to do that, for sure.
I think this feature request is getting some prioritization today.
Yeah. Well, that's why Robin's here, right?
To make decisions.
These are real users that are asking for it, so you know.
Yeah. It's good. So this was in relation to the updating scripts without starting an execution, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
I guess that does happen a lot.
We actually have another question here from James. Maybe I missed this in your docs, but what about local load generators that K6 Cloud can hit from outside the firewall? So what I assume you're asking, James, is for on-premise hosting and execution that is initiated by the K6 Cloud. Is that correct?
So basically, meaning you have what we refer to as load zones that you host yourself on your own infrastructure, or is this?
That's how I interpret it.
Yeah. So that's something that comes up quite a lot, especially for bigger organizations that have more strict sort of security concerns. They want sort of the load generation to happen from inside of their infrastructure while still getting the benefits of us storing, processing the metrics, and visualizing the metrics and etc., being able to share it and generate PDF reports and whatnot. So yeah, it's something that we are looking into how we can solve. But it's not trivial, because usually the conversation with security teams is that, okay, we can't run this on your infra, it needs to run on our infrastructure, or we can't let you guys into our infrastructure. And that's sort of becomes a difficult discussion then. So we're trying to understand how this can be solved in a way that is acceptable to the InfoSec teams.
I mean, maybe this is something that would require like a professional services agreement or something, because we don't just want to release instructions and be like, okay, well, if it doesn't work, sorry. We want to be able to support it from their end too.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple ways of doing this, but how we've discussed this internally in over the years is basically doing what we are doing right now within our sort of cloud accounts with Amazon right now, AWS. That's what we run our stuff on. But being able to do the same thing, but under the customer's account, right? So we basically would create accounts, specific load zones that people have access to. So if you are, your organization is called Acme or something, you would have your Acme 1 load zone, and that would represent some region in AWS or Google Cloud or Azure or what have you. And you can use that as you would use our load zones. It's just that this is a load zone that only you have access to, and it would spin up servers in that load zone, so under your infrastructure, and do everything as you would use our infrastructure, but it's now on your infrastructure, right? So we don't break the user experience. The user experience would be the same. It's just that you get some of the potential security benefits of running stuff under your own infrastructure, so you can access systems that we don't have access to basically from our infrastructure.
Okay, maybe probably the last question, since I know we're a bit over time. Sterling Grog says, I know we currently use static IPs with whitelist against Cloudflare as a workaround. Is the problem that you can't generate enough load locally to a given test environment?
Was he asking us or James, maybe?
I'm not sure. So I think he's talking about about needing to whitelist static IPs of our load generators, so that they don't trigger the Cloudflare protections against basically DDoS, right? And then the second part he's saying is a problem that you can't.
Oh, that was for James.
Oh, okay. He is talking to James.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I thought oops. Yeah.
All right, so it's Friday, and it's starting to approach the evening here in Sweden. So I think we probably should try to sum up now and close this office hours down. Probably Robin has to get back to his family, and I have a puppy here that is seeking my attention as well. So
I've got a husband. Does that count? All right. Any last words from either of you, Robin or Mark?
Well, I mean, it's there's lots of exciting things coming. I mean, I'm mostly right now focusing on the browser side of things, right? So I think that's very top of mind for me and very exciting for me. So I'm looking forward to getting that more widely tested and used eventually.
When was that?
I didn't hear you. I think the line is breaking up. So I'm looking forward to that, and then we have lots of exciting things in the cloud as well that I'm sure we'll continue discussing in future office hours as well.
And Mark, if people want to ask a question about K6 Cloud, what's the best way for them to ask it?
I'd probably just start with our support queue, support@k6.io. Send a message in there. If it needs to be routed to someone else, we're pretty good at doing that. I'd even jump in the support queue at times, so it's probably the easiest way to get visibility to multiple people.
Okay,
if there's feature requests, we have the GitHub repo. I don't have the URL available. I'm sure Sime will find it, but you can raise those feature requests in there. Put some priority behind a K6 update.
You are so fast. All right. Yeah. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Robin and Mark, and thanks to everybody who's watching now or will watch it in the future. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.